Good evening. I'm Francis Levy, co-director of the Philoctetes Center. Dr. Edward Nersessian is the other co-director. And welcome to Our Life in Poetry, Music, and Poetry. Before we begin tonight's program, I want to announce we are part, you may have seen posters around town, and it's this phrenological model of the skull, actually, then compartmentalized into the occiput, the parts of the human brain, the parietal lobes, and so forth and so on. And that is the poster for the Brainwaves Festival, of which we are proud to be part of with the Rubin Museum and SVA, and it was all sponsored by a very innovative not-for-profit gallery called Exit Art. So we're part of this whole program. Now, the art you see on the walls here is from a show that's been curated by Hallie Cohen, who's the head of the art department at Marymount Manhattan College and the curator of our exhibition space, and it's called Self-Reflection, the True Mirror. And self-conception is one of the themes of the show, and we hope that you'll avail yourselves of certain vehicles that we have, both in our annex, and that object on the wall is a kind of mirror in which you see yourself as others see you. Not that one in particular, but outside the mirror is it's called the True Mirror. So when you're leaving tonight, you may want to go into the annex and look at the True Mirror, in which you will actually literally see yourself, because it actually reverses the image. It actually, your left side is your right side is your left side, but it also does other things too. Some people, I felt that I looked just the same way, and we had a big fight after that. But try it. It's rather interesting. And that object, there's a similar effect, but sorry, it's not a similar effect, but there is an effect relating to self-conception if you start to peer into that particular mirror art that object represents. In any case, I'm very happy to welcome Mike Brazilla here tonight. One other thing I want to say before we start tonight's panel is that all Philoctetes events are simulcast, so that if you go to our site, www.philoctetes.org, you are seeing what you experience here, and then all previous Philoctetes events are on our site under past programming, and you just hit a button. You can see anything that we have produced here at Philoctetes at any time. In any case, I'm very pleased to introduce Mike Brazilla. He's an old friend of mine. He is the president and publisher of Presea Books, which is, in case you don't know it or do know it, it has a very fine line of poetry books, literary books, and books of educational interest. He founded this publishing house in 1975. He's also the director of the poetry series of the Philoctetes Center. And Mike is going to moderate tonight's panel and introduce our other panelists.
Okay, thank you, Frank. It's hard to imagine an important experience or event in our lives that doesn't have a song or a poem associated with it. A memory, the count of some unforgettable experience or moment in which we step out of our lives and look at them and look back at them. Tonight we will be listening to some great poems which are themselves about listening to music. And we will explore the relationship between music and poetry. Also, of equal importance, we will also listen to music. So I'm going to begin. We're going to introduce each of the panelists as they select several memorable poems about music, and we discuss them. But I'm going to begin by introducing Anne Hoyt, who is going to sing for us throughout the evening. Anne Hoyt has established herself as both an opera and oratorio singer, as well as a recitalist. Critically acclaimed performances include Susanna in La Noce di Figaro, Musetta in La Bohème, Despina in Case fan tutte, and Rosina in Il Barbiere di Siviglia. Or something like that. Helen, help me, what is that?
The Barber of Seville.
Oh, yes, okay. Miss Hoyt sings as a soprano soloist and a chorister and can be heard on both the Naxos and Hansler record labels. She has been on the voice faculty at the 92nd Street Y for over 5 years. She will be accompanied on the keyboard by Scott Schoonover, who is founder and director of Union Avenue Opera in St. Louis, music director for Union Avenue Christian Church, and artistic director of the St. Louis Women's Chorale. Okay? Oh, what are you going to be singing? What will you start with?
We'd like to start with O mio babbino caro, which is a famous Puccini aria from Gianni Schicchi. And in it, Lauretta, the daughter of Gianni Schicchi, is begging her father to please let her marry the beautiful boy that she has fallen in love with, even though they're from sort of rival families. A lot of people think that this aria is very sad and lamenting, but it's actually a young daughter trying to get her way with her father. So you can imagine how that turns out, the finger and the wrapping.
Okay, our first reader, Helen Handley Houghton, is a board member of the Academy of American Poets, the Hudson Review, and Lucia Albanese Puccini Foundation. A conservatory-trained pianist, she has an MA in Complet from the University of California, Berkeley, and is co-editor of the Music Lovers Poetry Anthology. She has also edited the Lovers Quotation Book and co-edited Child, a Literary Companion. She has been managing editor of the Pushcart Prize and the Hudson Review, taught English for 20 years, and serves as director of both Poets House and Poets and Writers.
Thank you, Michael. Well, it's very nice to be here and be part of this Our Life in Poetry series. And it's a thrill to hear Anne sing. Yeah. And I'm so happy she'll be singing at various intervals throughout the evening. When I think of that Puccini aria, which is one of my very favorite pieces of music, I'm reminded of a passage by Michael Steinberg in this wonderful book of his, For the Love of Music. And Steinberg is actually talking about Schumann, but the comment applies equally to Puccini's music. He says this. He says, how close his greatest, his most inward music comes to literally stopping breath and unsettling my heart. How deeply and dangerously human are the strangenesses of his music. How amazed, how humbled I am by the command that allowed him to translate his own vibrations into music, music that explodes out of itself. And life for me would be unimaginable without music and poetry. As Michael mentioned, I'm a trained pianist, and I did graduate work in comparative literature. I taught English for 20 years. And the two arts are just so integral a part of my day. There are many, many fine poems written about music by poets I admire, and the time just seemed right to put together a collection and also to organize a panel to further explore the unique relationship between poetry and music. It's particularly relevant because today more people listen to music than ever before in the history of the world. I mean, in addition to live performances, we have recordings, radio, television, computers, and iPods that carry music to a wider range of the population than could have been predicted even a few decades ago. Yet in spite of that widespread diffusion, music remains an enigma, one of the great mysteries of life. And I've been reading Oliver Sacks's new book, Musicophilia, which some of you may know, and it's a fascinating study. And at one point, he addresses that subject of the profound emotional effect of music and our reaction. And he quotes Schopenhauer. He says, "The inexpressible depth of music, so easy to understand, and yet so inexplicable." So the poems we'll read tonight are really a kind of exploratory search and an attempt to discover what it is about music that so profoundly moves us and why it's so important a part of our lives. No culture so far discovered lacks music, and music making seems to be something essential to human nature. In ancient Greece, which is usually considered the birthplace of Western civilization, music was ubiquitous and it was supremely important. Music appeared in rituals, in festivals. There were musical competitions right alongside the athletic competitions. And the poetry of Homer was originally recited to the accompaniment of a lyre. For the Greeks, music and poetry were inseparable, and the poet and the musician were often one and the same person. And the Greek word melos refers to the poem and the music that accompanied it. It's the origin of our word melody. And the language for music was the impassioned language of poetry rather than that of rational discourse. And again, we can imagine Homer being chanted to musical accompaniment, but we would not envision Plato's Republic, for example, being similarly read. No one knows for certain the origins of music, but there seems to be general agreement that both music and language are species original. That is, they are exclusive to our species. I mean, there are discussions, we can discuss some of this later, but we certainly know the profound place it plays in our lives. As a reader and as an editor, what I'm drawn to in poetry is a kind of excitement right at first hearing, at first sight. The novel J.M. Coates commented this, he describes it this way. He said, "It's a flash of revelation and a flash of response, like lightning, like falling in love." And I'm also drawn to poems that are about memorable encounters with music, listening to it, making it, performing it, and about those indelible transporting experiences that music generates or leads us to recall and relive. We all ask so much of our music and poetry to help us touch the intangible parts of reality, to shape our feelings, to return the past for us in a burnished, enlivened form, and to commemorate, to console, and to celebrate. But the question for me is, why have so many poets chosen to write about music? And I've been amazed by their numbers. And perhaps it's because it's the only art more lyrical than poetry itself in delineating the secrets and the movements of our inner lives. In a very eloquent memoir, Living with Music, Ralph Ellison writes the following: "In the swift whirl of time, music is a constant, reminding us of what we were and of that toward which we aspired. Art thou troubled? Music will not only calm, it will ennoble thee." And there's just one other passage I'd like to leave with you, and this is by the great Russian poet and novelist Boris Pasternak. After listening to a concert, he went home and wrote the following: "The melodies, mingling with the tears, run straight along your nerves to your heart, and you weep not because you feel sad, but because the way to your heart has been found so unerringly and so shrewdly." So it's our hope that the poems and music you hear this evening will resonate with each of you as they have with us. And I'd like to read just 3 poems. The first is by an 8th century Chinese poet named Li Yi. And it originally appeared in the Jade Mountain Anthology in 1929. It was translated by the American poet Witter Bynner. It's very short, just 4 lines, but it seems to me as though it gets right to the heart of why we need poetry and why we need music. This is Li Yi, on hearing a flute at night from the wall of Shusang. The sand below the mountain border lies like snow, and the moon like frost beyond the city wall. And someone somewhere playing a flute has made the soldiers homesick all night long. And poems about piano, of course, are a particular favorite of mine. D.H. Lawrence once has commented that the human soul needs actual beauty more than bread. And what is the piano, often as not, but a blind reaching out for beauty? And for the poet Edna St. Vincent Millay, a piano was just that. Millay grew up in an impoverished, fatherless family in a small coastal town in Maine. Her mother worked as a laundress to support herself and her daughters. And one afternoon when the mother came home weary from washing clothes, Edna Millay asked her to help her with a tune on the piano. They had an old piano there, and which she did. And afterwards, when she was left alone, Millay put her head down on the keyboard and wept. Robert Frost has also written, he has written about the piano, and I'd like to read a sonnet of his. It's called The Investment. And Frost, of course, used to say that a poem began as a lump in the throat, a kind of homesickness or longing. And in this poem, we see some of that with the piano. It's a sonnet. It's written in 3 4-line stanzas that rhyme, and then the last 2 lines are the heroic rhyming couplet that snap it all together. The second line is in parentheses and has quotation marks around it. This is Robert Frost, The Investment. Over back where they speak of staying, you couldn't call it living, for it ain't. There was an old, old house renewed with paint, and in it a piano loudly playing. Out in the plowed ground, in the cold, a digger among unearthed potatoes still standing was counting winter dinners one a hill, with half an ear to the piano's vigor. All that piano and new paint back there, was it some money suddenly come into, or some extravagance young love had been to, or old love on an impulse not to care, not to sink under being man and wife, but to get some color and music out of life? And I'll conclude with a poem by Billy Collins. Billy Collins was the poet laureate of the United States from 2001 to 2003, and he is the first poet since Robert Frost to achieve a wide popularity as well as high critical and cultural acclaim. He's also a jazz pianist and has written extensively about music. This poem, Nightclub, it begins rather playfully and accelerates toward the end. There are a few words that appear as little motifs throughout: beautiful, fools, foolish. This is Billy Collins, Nightclub. You are so beautiful, and I am a fool to be in love with you, is a theme that keeps coming up in songs and poems. There seems to be no room for variation. I have never heard anyone sing, I am so beautiful, and you are a fool to be in love with me. Even though this notion has surely crossed the minds of men and women alike. You are so beautiful, too bad you're a fool, is another one you don't hear. Or, you're a fool, to consider me beautiful. That one you will never hear, guaranteed. For no particular reason this afternoon, I am listening to Johnny Hartman, whose dark voice can curl around the concepts of love, beauty, and foolishness like no one else's can. It feels like smoke curling up from a cigarette someone left burning on a baby grand piano around 3 o'clock in the morning. Smoke that billows up into the bright lights, while out there in the darkness, some of the beautiful fools have gathered around little tables to listen, some with their eyes closed, others leaning forward into the music as if it were holding them up, or twirling the loose ice in a glass, slipping by degrees into a rhythmic dream. Yes, there is all this foolish beauty, born beyond midnight, that has no desire to go home, especially now when everyone in the room is watching the large man with the tenor sax that hangs from his neck like a golden fish. He moves forward to the edge of the stage and hands the instrument down to me and nods that I should play. So I put the mouthpiece to my lips and blow into it with all my living breath. We are all so foolish, my long bebop solo begins by saying, so damn foolish, we have become beautiful without even knowing it. Well, I will just conclude by saying reading so many poems about music has given me a renewed appreciation for the many ways that language can translate into our love of music. And in the end, music is what we make of it, of course, and what it makes of us. So thank you very much.
Okay, you're going to sing another song?
Yes,
What are you going to sing?
we're going to do a Purcell song from the opera Oedipus called Music for a While. And in it, it describes, it's basically saying that music can entrance even the snakes from Medusa's head to drop, and it can transport us. And as we know, music does transport us. So that's what this is about. And even it talks about if you're listening to music, Electo shall free all of the dead, the trapped souls. So that's what we're doing next.
Mary Stewart Hammond is the author of Out of Canaan, published by W. Norton. Her poems have appeared in many periodicals, including the Atlantic Monthly, the New Yorker, American Poetry Review, Boulevard, the Gettysburg Review, Field, the New Criterion, and the New England Review, the Paris Review, and the Yale Review, and numerous anthologies. She's been a fellow at MacDowell and Yaddo, as well as poet in residence at the Writers Community in New York City, where she continues to teach master classes in poetry. She has been nominated for 2 Pushcart Prizes. Mary?
I was told that I was going to be limited to 2 poems from the book, and one had to be mine. The extraordinary thing about this book that Helen has put together and Michael has published is that it's the first, this is the first anthology of poems about music since, I think, 1936. And Helen's eye, except where she slipped and chose me, her eye is really quite extraordinary. The poems in here are wonderful, and to be limited to one has been nearly impossible. I have finally selected a poem by an English poet called John Smith, and the title of the poem is Death at the Opera. In preparing for this poem, the first line, because I wanted to give this a good reading, I realized that the first line could be read in 17 different ways. And if it were a piece of music, I'd have notations telling me that this syllable should be held this long, this syllable this long, this syllable this long. And there are not the notations like that. And all the different readings give it a very different interpretation. The poet, fortunately, repeats that first line several times through the poem so that I get to give you all several interpretations of the poem and what he might have meant. This poem, just as music does, brings me to tears, and so I hope I can do this without crying. I think one of the things about music, and the reason it penetrates into us the way it does, is that it goes through language. It goes through our defenses. It goes into some place where we are not well defended, and it hits us there. And I think it's not always about the content. In operas, for example, we know that the soprano is always going to die. I think that's right. Is that true? Is that true? The soprano always dies. I think it may be the reason I prefer Balanchine's ballets, because at the end of all of his ballets, they're not story ballets. At the end of them, the ballerina triumphs. She's not done in by a man. She has been partnered by a man. But poems will also do the same thing to me, and I think it's not about the content. In this one, for example, if I can get through it without crying, I'm not bringing any baggage to it. It mentions a father. My father is in perfect health. His hip's bothering him a little bit, but there's nothing wrong with him. There is some other reason that this, I think, is going into our centers. And I will talk about that a little bit with the next poem that I do. Death at the Opera. Is this what death is like? I sit dressed elegantly in black and white in an expensive seat, watching Violetta expire in Covent Garden. How beautiful she is. As her voice lures me toward her death, the strings of the orchestra moisten my eyes with tears, though the tenor is too loud. Is this what death is like? No one moves. Violetta coughs, stumbles toward the bed. 20 miles away in the country, my father is dying. Violetta catches at her throat. Let me repeat. My father is dying in a semi-detached house on a main road 20 miles off in the country. The skull is visible. I do not want it to end. How exquisitely moving is death, the approach to it. The lovers sob. Soon they will be wrenched apart. How romantic it all is. Her hand is a white moth fluttering against the coverlet of the bed. The bones of my father's hands poke through his dry skin. His eyes look into a vacancy of space. He spits into a cup. In a few moments now, Violetta will give up the ghost. The doctor, the maid, the tenor who does not love her will sob. Almost our hearts will stop beating. How refreshed we have been. My father's clothes, too large for his shrunken frame, make him look like a parcel. Ah, the plush curtains are opening. The applause, the applause. It drowns out the ugly noise of my father's choking and spitting. The bright lights glitter far more than the 100-watt bulb at home. Dear Violetta, how she enjoys the flowers, like wreaths showered for her own death. She gathers them to her. We have avoided the coffin. I think that my father would like a box of good plain beech, being a man from Buckinghamshire, a man of the country, a man of the soil. I have seen my father, who is fond of animals, kill a cat that was old and plain with a blow from the edge of his palm. He buried it in the garden, but I cannot remember its name. Now the watchers are dispersing. The taxis drive away, black in the black night. A huddle of people wait like mourners round the stage door. Is this what death is like? For Violetta died after all. It is merely a ghost. The voice gone, the beautiful dress removed, who steps in the rain. Art, I conceive, is not so removed from life, for we look at death, whether real or imagined, from an impossible distance. And somewhere a final curtain is always descending. The critics are already phoning their obituaries to the papers. I do not think God is concerned with such trivial matters. But Father, though there will be no applause, die well.
That poem captures some process that happens, I think, when I listen to music, that there's a parallel thing going on. There's both, you're very much into the music and delight in it, and it allows you to deal with or remember or act out or reenact some deeply important experience in a parallel. If time permits, at the end, I want to read a Milosz poem. In music. Yeah, I'm sorry. No,
and I think you're exactly right. There is, I think all of us, by the time we are 20 or 30, have experienced some kind of loss, some kind of death, a sibling, a friend, a grandparent, or something, and we think we've dealt with it. We think this is, we've learned how to live with this. But I think it's like a tape that plays back underneath, and music somehow triggers that tape. I think it also, though, whether it's music or whether it's poetry or whether it's the ballet, it is evidence to me of the spirit. I mean, we can see it, we can hear it. Her voice, I think this is what it is to be fully human, and it so rarely do we encounter that. But I think that's. Should I read mine?
Yes, you're going to read the Edgartown.
Okay.
Great. This is one of her own, and it's called what?
The title is so long, my daughter said, "Mom, are you sure that's not the poem?" The title of the poem is Seeing Mozart's Piano Quartet in E-flat major in the Old Whaling Church, Edgartown. the poem is patterned after the quartet. Mozart did only 2 piano quartets, and so I have patterned the poem after that, meaning that just as the quartet has 3 movements, the poem has 3 stanzas, and I have tried to set up the timing of it so that the different stanzas are in proportion to the way the movements relate to each other in the piece of music. See Mozart's Piano Quartet in E-flat major in the Old Wailing Church, Edgartown. They wait, 5 women in black, before a wall painted such a flat, soft gray, it reads as silence or sky. The pianist's hands curve over the keyboard. The page turner leans toward the pianist's score. The violinist, the violist, the cellist bring their bows near the strings. Fluted pilasters rise into an arched ceiling high, framing them. The church, classic Greek revival straight from the style books, and retardataire at that, is 57 years younger than the music you are about not to hear. But with its pillars, its 2 center aisles dividing the nave into 3 parts, in its classicism and its purity, it is useful for showing the architecture of the sonata. The thing about music, it takes place in time and can't be seen, nor can it be heard in a poem. A colorless, unfinished 8 o'clock sky pauses in triple-hung windows flanking the pilasters. Scrub oak darken the lower panes. The pianist nods. We know by the musician's movements that Mozart's Allegro begins its lift up off the pages on the music stands. But from this page, there is only action. The music is silent as old black and white movies before the arrival of sound. The pianist misses some notes. The violist looks at the violinist. Her hair a stubble 3 months after chemo. Strings shine on the black necks of the instruments. The musician's fingers climb up and down like spiders, thumbs hugging the backsides of the necks. They glide their bows or make them tiptoe, forearms rigid across the strings. The second theme's leading motif, almost lost under the angelic, repeats and repeats like supplications. It is one of Mozart's miracles, this longing under joy, the flirtations with death balancing lyricism. But you have only my word for it. The ensemble coaxes the allegretto and transubstantiation from wooden boxes. In a year, the violist will be dead. The music breathes in the musicians' bodies. You can see it in their shoulders, their spines, their wrists, their fingers, and the white grid of the window's muntins cages the black sky. Even where the bottom sash is open to the summer sky, the night is held back until the musicians stop, hold their poses, wait, 5 seconds, 12, for the last notes to find home, and fling up their arms, pumped with arrival. They rise, bowing before the sky of the soft gray wall. The lights come up in a country church. A lot of...
I love the end.
got changed.
Yes, I
You can see. A lot of people ask me whether I knew the violist, and I didn't really. But listening to this concert, I was very conscious of that, and I thought either she is doing a downtown look or it's chemo. But when I started doing the poem, because the wonderful thing about Mozart is that there is this tension underneath the joy, there is this anxiety, this sense of death underneath it. And so I realized that if Zena had not existed, I would have had to have put something like that into the poem to get that sense underneath the joy of Mozart. I think one of the things that makes that gives poetry the power that it has, it's the same thing that we get in music. It is the rhythm. It is the meter. Something I read recently said that that music is about the only thing that occupies both sides of the brain. And I think that poetry does the same thing, because poetry and music exist over time, like storytelling. There's this and this and this. One thing follows after the other. And when a poem is happening, there is a rhythm, there is a music in it that is working on the reader in a way the reader doesn't know what has even happened to them, because there's this same rhythm, and it's the same thing that is going on in music. It's one of the things that gets right into us, this going through time, but doing it with a certain rhythm and a certain meter. We learn, those of us who write poetry, that if we use an anapast and then a dactyl, that's going to have this effect or that effect on a reader, and we don't have to tell the reader how to feel. That rhythm is what is working on the reader without saying anything.
Were you aware when you selected both these poems that there is a common, that there's sort of an acceptance of death, an acceptance of awareness of death, or a dealing with it while listening to music? It's just, is it a coincidence, or that seems to me that they have that in common? I don't know. Do they?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So many other poems.
And so many other poems. Yeah, yeah. But it's a way of sort of well, they're different, but asserting life while accepting and being very much confronted with a terminal illness, basically, in both cases.
That death is always, what did the first poem, there's always a curtain, coming down someplace. Death is always going on under life, and at some place I think we do know this, and that's why so many of these, we get to Lucia de Lammermoor, and she's going crazy, and the tears are just running down our face, and she's going mad. Or La Traviata, we know that she's about to die. There is this, that's one of the great things I think about the opera, is this sense of this is what life is really all about. It's death is going on all the time underneath us. And at some level we know it. Yeah. And the music finds that spot, that place of loss and grief.
While at the same time asserting life.
Goes on.
As you're about to do.
We've chosen 4 very short songs by Aaron Copland, and it's poetry of Emily Dickinson. We'll bookend. The first song mentions music. It's Why Do They Shut Me Out of Heaven, which then goes into The World Feels Dusty, which then goes into Heart, We Will Forget Him, and we'll end with I've Heard an Organ Talk Sometimes. These are a set of 12. It's meant to be done as one long set of 12. I think the whole piece lasts about 25 minutes. And the music really does you can hear the next piece in the previous piece, and then you can also, when you've started the next piece, you can hear the piece you've just sung in it. It's amazing how it's all intertwined. So we will do these 4 pieces. Can I disconnect myself? Okay, fine.
There's a poem right there.
That's very good. That's wonderful.
Let's write that down.
Why do they shut me out of heaven? Did I sing too loud? But I can sing a little minor, timid as a bird.
Patrice Swenson is the executive director of the Academy of American Poets, who sponsors poets.org, the web's most comprehensive site devoted to poetry. Other Academy programs include National Poetry Month, the Poetry Audio Archive, American Poet Magazine, and numerous awards given to poets. Before joining the Academy, she was director of programs for the Massachusetts Cultural Council. Prior to that, she was the executive director of Copper Canyon Press, which she co-founded in 1972, and where she worked for 20 years publishing poetry. Great. Are you going to read the Conrad Aiken poem?
I am going to read the Conrad Aiken poem.
Great.
And it's actually, Mary Stewart and I could have had a conversation, and she touched on so many points that I thought about in looking at these poems and in selecting poems and in thinking about the relationship between poetry and music, which was what really intrigued me as I thought about talking today. Is there are, obviously I would go for where the metaphors are and where the resemblances are and look at the similarities, but certainly the idea of time and the fact that both of these arts rely on movement through time and the development of a kind of structure, that the parts, the relationship of the different parts, the images, the sounds, the tones, makes the art of it, and it's put together in a way to get at the emotion and to go in under the conscious mind to get at something that's below the surface.
In a lot of these panels, I find it very useful to talk about poetry the way I would talk about music. To look at moments within a poem as lyrical moments of tone and awareness, and to see how they shift and move throughout the poem and what direction they go in and how they circle back, and how certain points of the poem have reciprocities with other points. And I find it critically very useful to look at the movement, the lyrical movement within good poems. So I think that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, and the other point that I'll just mention very briefly, actually, the poet Robert Hass wrote, "Noise made with the knowledge of mortality is poetry."
Oh, good one.
And that's noise, so that includes music. It's
Can you read that again, please?
a noise made with the knowledge of mortality is poetry. So that also goes to what Mary Stewart was talking about. The first poem, and I was going to read several. The first one's a little on the longer side, but then a couple of shorter poems. This is from Senelin, a biography, which is by Conrad Aiken. And it's a longer poem. I'm reading just an excerpt from the third section, which is his cloud destiny. And it's the second and section of that section and the penultimate section of the entire poem. Senelin, alone before us, played a music. Was it himself he played? We sat and listened, perplexed and pleased and tired. Listen, he said, and you will learn a secret, though it is not the secret you desired. I have not found a meaning that will praise you. Out of the heart of silence comes this music, quietly speaks and dies. Look, there is one white star above the black houses and a tiny man who climbs toward the skies. Where does he walk to? What does he leave behind him? What was his foolish name? What did he stop to say before he left you as simply as he came? Death? Did it sound like? Love and God and laughter, sunlight and work and pain? No, it appears to me that these were symbols of simple truths he found no way to explain. He spoke, but you could not understand him. You were alone, and he was alone. He sought to touch you and found he could not reach you. He sought to understand you and could not hear you. And so this music, which I play for you. Does it mean only what it seems to mean, or is it a dance of foolish waves in sunlight above a desperate depth of things unseen? Listen. Do you not hear the singing voices out of the darkness of this sea? But no, you cannot hear them, for if you heard them, you would have heard and captured me, yet I am here, talking of laughter, laughter and love and work and God, as I shall talk of these things hereafter, in wave and sod. Walk on a hill and call me, Senlin, Senlin. Will I not answer you as clearly as now? Listen to the rain and you will hear me speaking. Look for my heart in the breaking of a bough. Which is a poem. This section, it really is terrifically moving to me. It gets at what I think the other thing that that poetry and music both attempt to do, which is to forge some kind of a connection, to find and listen to, and then convey the precise tones of the heart. And in a way, they both reside in the realm of what Donald Hall calls the unsayable said. There is something beyond what words can capture, what music can capture, that we're only attempting to transport to another being and to make a connection with another being. The second poem I'm going to...
Can I ask you one question?
Yeah.
There's a great line here. There are many great lines.
Oh, they're great, great lines.
What was his foolish name? Is that at the heart of the poem? I mean, that in other words, the poem is really, it's sort of just about life itself, isn't it? Isn't it?
And about the attempt to communicate in life and to try to make something of it by making a connection with someone else, with someone's else. To leave, to leave as everyone is obsessed with, to leave some kind of a marker. Whether it's a poem or a piece of music, or simply that you've touched another heart deeply and will be carried with that person through life.
It's such a sweet poem. I mean, what was his foolish name? It both sort of ridicules our efforts and yet embraces and exalts, and at the same time, it's such a light and subtle, amazing.
Yeah. These were symbols of simple truths he found no way to explain.
Right.
He spoke, but you could not understand him.
Right.
Yeah.
It's sort of an awareness that we keep very much to ourselves in a way, and then maybe
usually.
share. Yes. Yeah.
Usually.
Yeah. Okay, continue.
The second poem I was going to read. Actually, maybe I'll just hold on this and just read 3 for now. Okay. But the whole notion of poetry getting at what it is to be embodied, to be in a body, right. And how there is always a subtle tension in poetry between form and content, and the two have to be absolutely wed and in perfect balance for a poem to really work. And it again goes to what Mary Stewart was saying about conflict. And poetry works because of some kind of conflict, and often that conflict is a great pleasure at the sounds. It's really the love of the rhythms, and also the mouth forming the words, the just sensual bodily pleasure of listening and forming those noises. But so often the message is tragic or sad, or you are addressing death in one way or another. And that was certainly true of this poem. This is a poem by J.D. McClatchy, Callas, C-A-L-L-A-S, the singer. Her voice, steeped in a rancid, syrupy phlegm, whatever's not believed remains a grace, while again she invokes the power that yields, splintered timbre and quick consuming flame, the quickest way to take hold of the heart's complications. its pool of split religion, a long black hair, sweat stuck to the skin, the bitter sleep of the dying, the Jew in Berlin. Who sent you here? The sharp blade pleads, storm cloud, thorn hedge, star chill, blood bubble floating to the top of the glass. The light from flesh rise to soul set. The world dragging the slow weight of its shame like the train of pomp, guttering candle, her voice. Which does, to me, bring her voice to mind. There's so many words in there. The section storm cloud, thorn hedge, star chill, those are all single words that McClatchy has joined into single words, and I love those combinations, storm cloud, thorn hedge, star chill, and then goes directly to blood bubble floating to the top of the glass. An extraordinary poem. And the last poem that I was going to read is, again, a section of a longer poem. I selected so many poems from Helen's fabulous anthology.
Thank you. I love that.
This is an extraordinary, extraordinary collection, and I agree what you've put together. The strength of your ear in assembling poems that have such great sounds, and lucky for everyone, they can find all of these poems in the anthology. So I actually also wanted to bring a couple that were not in the anthology. And this is a section from Galway Connell's long poem, The Book of Nightmares. And it is in the last section of that long poem, which is, again, in 10 sections with sections within sections. So I'm reading 2 subsections, 5 and 6, and then the last section is very short, but I'm not going to read that, and it is the final section of the poem. This section is, again, about a very specific experience of listening to music, and what poetry really tries to do is, actually, Rilke said, "For poems are not, as people think, simply emotions. One has emotions early enough. They are experiences." So even though this is recounting an experience of listening to music, it is in and of itself also an experience that he creates for the listener. That Bach concert I went to so long ago, the chandeliered room of ladies and gentlemen who would never die. The voices go out. The room becomes hushed. The violinist puts the irreversible sorrow of his face into the opened palm of the wood. The music begins. A shower of rosin, the bow hairs listening down all their length, to the wail, the sexual wail of the back alleys and blood strings we have lived, still crying, still singing from the sliced intestine of cat. This poem, if we shall call it that, or concert of one divided among himself, this earthward gesture of the skydiver, the worms on his back still spinning forth and already gnawing away the silks of his loves who could have saved him. This free floating of one, opening his arms into the attitude of flight as he obeys the necessity and falls.
Let me read, Helen, I think we should, let me read a Milosz poem, which is also about listening to music. And then maybe you'll sing the...
2 more.
2 more? Mm-hmm. Should she? Yeah. Let me read this one short poem, and then you read, and then you'll sing both songs. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Just do one.
Okay. Do two. Do two. This is a very brief poem by Czesław Miłosz. It's rather ambiguous. It seems to be. My guess is, and I welcome response, is that he's in one place listening to a concert and imagines an experience that took place at some imagined home or some real home very far away a long time ago. That's my guess. It's called In Music. Wailing of a flute, a little drum, a small wedding cortege accompanies a couple, going past clay houses in the street of a village. In the dress of the bride, much white satin. How many renunciations to sew it once in a lifetime. The dress of the groom, black, festively stiff. The flute tells something of the hills, parched, the color of deer, hens scratch in dry mounds of manure. I have not seen it. I summoned it listening to music. The instruments play for themselves in their own eternity. Lips blow, agile fingers work, so short a time. Soon afterward, the pageant sinks into the earth. But the sound endures, autonomous, triumphant, forever visited by, each time returning, the warm touch of cheeks, interiors of houses, and particular human lives of which the chronicle makes no mention.
That's so wonderful because you get a visual, and the music eliciting a visual scene.
Yes.
As well as the emotional longing.
It could well be even about the creation of a poem. It could even be that listening to music was the start of a poem about a village, presumably someplace else.
Or some structure.
Or some structure, yeah.
Any structure. It's a lovely poem.
It's a very powerful poem, and also, again, the notion of, he uses the word triumphant while talking, imagining the whole procession sinking into the ground. So it's this heroic sort of awareness. It's both this triumphant assertion of life in music and poetry, while daring to imagine, the most. Not just it's beyond death. It's also just the incredible transience of all experiences: marriage, excitement, burning cheeks, we all perish, and it's really remarkable. And another thing too, there's a kind of, I think in Death at the Opera, and to some extent in your poem, there's a kind of a democratic notion too, that in the aura and the realm of high art or high culture, we all die in a certain way. This experience here that isn't chronicled, that's of no, say, historic or cultural significance. This common experience is sort of what art, what poetry and music are sort of all about in a way. It's not all about, but I mean it is about us all. It is at the end high art, culture. It is about common human experience. And in Death at the Opera, the father, remember, he was a killer. He was a countryman. He was he was everything, but he was a man of the land, a man of the soil. And Milosz is writing about a procession, a wedding procession of just, you sort of imagine.
The renunciations that go into making that one dress in a
Yes,
lifetime.
incredible.
It's just
And the great line, once in a lifetime.
Once in a
Yeah,
lifetime.
yeah.
Yeah.
just
Yeah, yeah.
amazing.
And that is captured in his art, yeah.
In the Death in the Opera poem, one of the things that I like about it is that we are seeing this very, very high
Right.
art, this very stylized thing.
Exactly.
Underneath it, there is this real life that is going on.
That's right. And remember the image at the end where the reviewers phone in their reviews, to their papers. But you're right. It's ultimately about this real life experience that we.
I think this is the way our minds. This is the way our minds work. We're out there going through this, that, and the other thing. We're writing a story, or we're washing windows, or we're doing something like that. But meanwhile, there's this subtext underneath that's also happening at the same time, not always acknowledged. I just love the way he has got that woven together.
And the physical quality, that art is a physical thing. I mean, the poem is a physical thing. It has that rhythmic quality. And there is an immortality because of that. I mean, someone lives again in the music. I can hear.
Well, it's it's almost like it's almost like yes, it's something that moves on, or it's shared through time, even though there's awareness that we perish. I mean, that
And the physical quality of music, you can hear two notes of Wagner, and you know it's Wagner. You know it's got a Dammerung or whatever the piece is, and you can hear Puccini. You know it instantly. Mozart, Beethoven. There's something about the physical person who is there. Their breath, perhaps something embodied in them is in those notes on paper.
That's another thing about poetry. When we read a poem and we read it out loud, for example, because of the way the line breaks work, we are getting the breathing of the poem. And in the process, we are taking in the poet. We're taking in the very poet's breath in reading this. We're internalizing the very breathing of the thing, which I think is an amazing thing about poetry.
And poetry and the music.
Poetry and the music.
Yeah, do it all.
The rhythm and the meter. What is it? I've got something here that. Thomas Mann, as you know, talks a great deal about music, but he also talks that time is the medium of music. Music divides, measures, articulates time, and can shorten it, yet enhance in value both at once. Thus, music and narration are alike in that they can only present themselves as flowing, as a succession in time, as one thing after another, and both differ from the plastic arts, which are complete and present and unrelated to time, save as all bodies are, whereas narration, like music, even if it should try to be completely present at any given moment, would need time to do it in. It's one thing, there's
That's great. That's wonderful.
A number of there's some composers who call their works like paintings. And I think Scriabin does that. Ravel does it. They're sort of sound poems
and tone poems.
But they can't really be that because they still move through time. Whereas a painting is a single moment. If it's an historical painting, I suppose we will, you'll see all sorts of other things in it, but you're still seeing a single moment. Whereas in music and in poetry, you are moving through time. Narration makes you move through time. Even the lyric poem is much more a single moment in time, whereas a narrative poem is moving through time. My own feeling is ideally, the ideal poem is both a narrative and a lyric at the same time. It makes that leap that a lyric makes.
The interesting, yeah, go ahead.
I actually am dying to hear a little more music. Before we go off onto the more.
The composer that Faust is
I have no idea.
No.
I watch it.
The Mon novel. He had a whole novel based upon the life of the model.
Yes.
I was about to say, no, but that's the opera.
No, that's the opera.
Can't tell you right now.
Yeah.
Gert.
No.
Go? No,
It was a
Yeah, there's
composer.
plenty of time.
Yeah.
Oh, the composer.
Yeah. Anyway, that's the.
Back to this, and we're getting towards the music. Don't worry. Just both Death at the Opera and the Milosh, they're dealing with time and awareness, but they're blending deliciously, sort of two times and two places too. That's another aspect of the use of time.
Yeah.
In the Milosh, it's incredibly ambiguous, even where the speaker is, and where the place is, or when what he's remembering. But it's such a universe. It's such a powerful poem because it's in its ambiguity. I don't know. We can step into it, or I don't know. But Death at the Opera too. It's this allowing, this play of two different experiences in two different time awarenesses, past and present, presumably past and present.
I think it's also, though, the way the rhythms of that poem and the way that poem moves down the page.
Which one? The
Death at the Opera.
Right.
So that by the time we get to Die Well, that would not have the same effect.
Right. If it was just about
all the rhythm that has gone on. It's the rhythm and the pacing down the page, so that it finally has that effect. The same way in music when. In Lucia de Lammermoor, when she gets that final last note that just breaks our heart into pieces, because her heart's broken in pieces, it's what has led up to that note so that it has that kind of effect on us.
Definitely.
So it's the rhythm and the meter all the way down through that poem
That acceleration.
that is leading us to have that kind of effect at the end.
Francis, in the Magic Mountain, isn't it Beethoven's Hammerklavier? I don't know the Faust, but
I was talking about Dr. Faust. It's either Berg or it's Schoenberg, or I'm not sure. It's one of the modern composers. But the whole novel is about the life of I believe, a composer. It's been a long time since I've.
Yeah, it's been a very long time since I've read it.
And then leitmotifs themselves in Mon are to me, have their essence in poetry, but basically, like in Proust, there's that whole notion of music and writing of music.
Yeah, it's just in and out. It weaves all the way through.
Yeah, and that was the first thing you said tonight in talking about Milosh. That was interesting that music seems to came in a way you can't make these kinds of statements. That music emanating from poetry. I mean, that's a very deep idea, profound idea, really. That you all brought.
Or the other way around. I've been of the theory that the metaphorical came before the literal. That music was there first. That the passions drove us to sing or speak or connect, and then the more rational side came later. But I know there are many sides to that argument, but I'm pretty persuaded.
And don't they have a kind of, isn't there, we've been talking a lot about this subcortical thinking and the limbic, and they were talking a lot about passing beyond, and music is a way of passing beyond cognitive modes and kind of verbal consciousness. That's come up in the Philately Center a lot, the discussion of those types of the limbic elements of the brain.
Well, that's exactly what Donald Hall gets at in the essay, The Unsayable Said, is it's language, and we think it's precise and we think we're communicating, but there's a subtext to the language, and in poetry especially, there's an awareness that there's an undertow that is working often in a different direction, and it's that conflict in poetry that, in fact, so many poems have a turning point. I mean, sonnets are all built around a turn, but it's not just in sonnets that you find different directions happening, and also just the ambivalence in so many poems. Two different things are both simultaneously present in poetry.
We were talking.
You don't have to.
There's a famous Carl Sandburg poem that ends. I always stay with me. It ends yes, no, yes, no, yes, no.
Well, there's the famous Catullus, Odi et Amo.
There's
and I
one
love.
other thing talking about things going on at once. With music, I mean, there's the music that we hear voluntarily. We turn on a record player, or I sit down at the piano and play. And then there's this music that just pops in my head involuntarily. And I think with all of us, in and out the day, I'm still hearing your first aria again. And it just stays there. And they're unusual, but that is going on even while one talks. The music pops in involuntarily.
There's some people who have certain amount of brain degeneration are plagued by that.
Yes, I have read, and it can drive them crazy. And there have to be ways to protect yourself from being bombarded by. That's.
Oliver Sacks talks about that.
Yes, he does.
Yeah,
I was
that's
gonna
right.
say-
That's
I was
right.
gonna say
That's
he
Well,
has.
no, but also in the current New York Review of Books,
Oh,
it's about
yes.
the president has a tumor.
Yeah.
And he just starts to hear, well, it's about basically trains, but he gets, instead of part of his brain, is overtaken by sound.
The tumor issue, just degeneration of the brain. With old age it can happen. You don't have to have necessarily had a serious illness, but it can happen in certain, depending on which part of the brain is more damaged than the other. This can happen.
And then on the other side, there are moments, I think, a lyrical line comes to us and almost kind of saves us. I mean, we need it for whatever reason. And anyway.
Who was the man who said that? I think he was a composer who said that music is organized sound. That's true of poetry also. It's organized sound.
And the composer Roger Sessions has this wonderful line. He talks about the musical phrase as being a gesture of the spirit. It's not the
Yes.
whole spirit, but the gesture of the spirit. I thought that's so beautiful because the poem is that way too. The poetic line, it's a gesture of the spirit. A little inkling.
Can you hear some music?
Yes, let's have some music.
Okay.
We'll do the Sondheim. No, we'll just do the Sondheim.
Sometime, and then we still have, and then maybe we'll talk.
But I wanted to say a little something about how talent. We were all talking so long ago now about music and how your life is intertwined with it, and you were talking about how special it is to you. Obviously, I loved music as a kid, and my grandmother always played the piano, and my mother forced us to take the piano, but then I ended up finding out I could go to college for it, which was just awesome. I didn't want to have to do math or something that I didn't know very well. So, which is where I met Scott some 18 years ago. Yes, we started college at age 10, and he was my first accompanist. My voice teacher recommended him, and we had planned to have a half-an-hour meeting to just go over a few things, and it turned into about 2 hours, where I introduced him to some music that I knew that he didn't know, and vice versa. And so that's sort of been our whole lives now, or half of our lives at least now that we've been together and making music together through the opera company and events like this. And I can't imagine. Even though we don't sit around talking about music all the time, it is always intertwined. We're intertwined in that way, which is something that is so special. And in fact, most of my closest relationships I've met either someone I've been attending a concert next to, or someone who I've sung on a concert with, and you end up having such a special thing because you have that moment together that, although it's moving, it's frozen in your memory. The first time that we did this aria together, or the first time that we did this song together. So we will be singing now a Sondheim song. I'm a New Yorker now because I've lived here 13 years, and I have fallen in love with Sondheim and feel that every song was written about my life, and he must know me. And this particular song is, well, it's from a couple of his different reviews. A Little Night Music, I think, is the first one it was in, and then Marry Me a Little. And it's called What More Do I Need? And it talks about a small apartment like the one I used to live in, and how everything is going to be wonderful as long as this person says he loves her. So this is What More Do I Need of Stephen Sondheim. Maybe.
There's a button to push there somewhere.
There.
Once I hated this city, now it can't get me down. Slushy, humid, and gritty, what a pretty town. What thought I could be duller, more depressing, less gay. Now my favorite color is gray. A wall of rain as it turns to sleet, the lack of sun on a one-way street. I love the grime all the time, and what more do I need? My window pane has a lovely view, an inch of sky and a fly or two. Why, I can see half a tree, and what more do I need? The dust is thick and it's galling, it simply can't be excused. In winter, even the falling snow looks used. My window pane may not give much light, but I see you, so the view is bright. If I can love you, I'll pay the dirt no heed. With your love, what more do I need? Someone shouting for quiet, someone starting a brawl. Down the block there's a riot, and I'll buy it all. Listen now, I'm ecstatic. Hold me close and be still. Hear the lovely pneumatic drill. A subway train thunders through the Bronx, a taxi horn on the corner honks. But I adore every roar, and what more do I need? I hear a crane making street repairs, a 2-ton child running wild upstairs. Steam pipes clang, silent bang, and what more do I need? The neighbors yell in the summer, the landlord yells in the fall, so loud you can't hear the plumber pound the wall. An aeroplane rose across the bay, but I can hear you as clear as day. You said you loved me, above all sound and speed. With your love, what more do I need?
Mike, do we want to point out that this particular anthology, I think, is on sale?
Yeah.
As is Mary Stewart's book.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
after the...
Yeah, Mary's book of poems, and yes, and the anthology, which we did a year ago.
All of our books are
Helen
on
and
sale
I
together.
are on sale outside. And we're here to answer questions, or
It's
Maybe
questions.
Another song?
She has one, maybe. If she
Ed,
wants
are you
to.
making a request?
Yes.
Okay. No.
Do you need a rest?
Frank, you call
You'd
it.
like it? No, we would be
I
happy.
always-
And there's
Love to
still
hear you.
time for question and answer.
Chant.
And there's
You
still
sing
time for
another
questions.
song.
Yeah.
Well, question and answer first, or would you like another song
Why don't we have another song now?
Yeah,
Yes.
and then, okay.
Helen?
Well, let's discuss what we'll do. So have a question and answer bit as well.
We're speechless on those.
Okay, so question answer.
Are there any questions?
Are we even saying?
Oh, here's a question.
There's a question.
Yeah.
In some of the remarks that I heard,
Oh, yeah, could you come up with the mic since we want to pick it up because it's being broadcast, actually. people want to hear what you have to say.
In some of the remarks that I heard, I couldn't help thinking that they were applicable also to prose, to good prose. So I just wanted to have a comment from you on that.
I definitely think that. I want to do a panel
On poetry and prose.
poetry and prose. No, I want to do a panel on the poetic structure of prose.
Interesting.
And there's definite prose is definitely applicable, and there's some. I've always been very interested in Hemingway's great short stories, an early collection of short stories called In Our Time, and they practically can be read as poems, and the whole collection sort of as a long series of like a lyrical sequence of poems. And James Joyce's The Dead, the great short story. It's a movement of awareness. It's highly sensuous in character. It ends with some sort of breakthrough of awareness, or some. And we talked about in the midst of triumph how art enables us to deal with our mortality, but The Dead ends with this profound epiphany of I forget his name, but it was sort of a boy. Conroy. Was it the boyfriend of his wife or something? Right. So The Dead deals with the movement of awareness. I think it's in one particular evening they go to a party someplace, and it's simply about. I mean, its lyrical structure is very, very similar to the way many of these poems we've been looking at, and you can say that of many novels too, although they go about it in different ways. And of course, there's the whole world of the prose poem, which is right something in between, which is a genre right in.
Like Vikram Seth, I guess.
Yeah. What were you going to say?
I think that the biggest difference is the way prose and poetry deal with time. Prose is still a narrative. Poems are very often a narrative. But in prose, they have to address the movement of time. You will find in prose then, now,
right.
Suddenly.
You almost have the problem of story. You have sort of not the problem, but the challenge or the structure of the limitation of story.
They have to mark the passage of time.
Where poetry,
a poem, the thing that a poem can do is to leap over that. And that's what it needs. It needs to do that successfully, leap over that.
Another thing that poetry does, prose precedes, and just the etymology of the words, prose precedes, verse reverses. And they are linked. And prose moves through time, even if the structure is flashback, flash forward.
Right.
But there is a narrative thread. And poetry so often relies on repetition, on the circling back to certain ideas. It's not a, and of course vast generalization, and I'm talking mostly about lyric poetry here, but it has a very different, and I think time is exactly, but it's in the nature of the forms.
And part of the difference and it's connected to time, is one definition I remember that was a favorite of the late Ivor Winters was that poetry is language in lines, and he phrased it as considered utterance. It's just tighter. Those lines give it a physicality and considered utterance, rather than sort of replicating conversation or dialogue. Although Frost has many characters speak in his poems, he's a master at it, and he makes it into poetry rather than prose.
Couldn't we also
there are
say
many
that
connections.
poetry is sort of like, it's just condensed or raw, some of the raw stuff of what we find over time, and with the illusion of story in fiction.
Not necessarily. I mean, a lot of lyric poetry is if not wholly devoid of narrative, of plot, of things happening. It's more a cri de coeur. It's the self. It's the individual self pouring out, as with a lyre and the lyric. And there is a sense of a self, whereas a self speaking and addressing, and narrative poetry, of course, is something different, or dramatic poetry, but for lyric poetry, which is 95% of the poetry that we talk about, that we read, that we look at, there is a single self, and it's a single perspective that is very different in a way than a first-person narrator in a piece of prose.
That's a terrific point, that it's a single sensibility rather than entering the lives.
But
of
if we look at poetry the way we experience music,
it's a direct address to another.
Right.
It's a great question.
Yeah. Anyways, it is
it's
a great
talk
question.
about it for the next year.
It is another panel.
There's another panel.
It's another
Exactly.
panel.
That's
Absolutely.
another panel, and I want to do that.
I think we're ready, though. Should we conclude with another song? And
Yes,
then
this is it.
That sounds terrific. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
So is this one on?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. This is Mimi's first aria from Bohème. Oh, exactly. And in fact, it's one of those arias where if you don't have the ticker running above with the exact translation, it still moves you. It just, the music is so lovely. But I will just tell you a little bit, sort of, what she's saying. It's her first entrance, and she's saying, yes, they call her Mimi, but her real name is Lucia, and she's just a simple flower. She embroiders flowers on silk, and she's flirting with Rodolfo and saying she's just very simple, and she goes to the church to pray, and she doesn't know why they call her Mimi, and she doesn't always go to church, but she's always praying. She's basically talking about how wonderful she is, and so that he will then, and he of course already likes her, and then they get in the dark and they find the key and everything. So, but she's basically talking about how in April, the first kiss of April, she can't wait for that, and it's her sort of love song to this stranger that she's already fallen in love with. Oh, and I also should say that this is, this isn't really a role that I'm usually cast in. I'm cast as Musetta, the rambunctious flirt who comes in the second act and sort of, leaves her wake of men behind her. So, and in fact, Scott cast me as that one year. So Mimi is a role that I don't really do, but I just love the music so much. So I'm going to have a little bit of a cheat sheet here so that I can do it justice.
Sì, mi chiamano Grippi, ma il mio nome è Lucia. La storia mia è breve, a te l'ho seta ricamo in casa e niente fuori d'ora in poi
Further information about our programs and a complete archive of past Philoctetes events is available at philoctetes.org.